I want you to picture three things for me. First, a roaring, like blood-spattered chainsaw from a classic horror movie.
Okay, starting off strong.
Right. Second, a ridiculously cramped New York City apartment kitchen where you basically have to stand out in the hallway just to get the oven door open.
Oh, I know the type.
Yeah. And third, just a tiny glass jar of capers.
That is quite the visual. It sounds like the aftermath of some really niche culinary-themed suspense thriller.
I mean, it really does, but the reality is actually much more interesting. The bizarre, kind of compelling question for you today is, what do those three completely unrelated things have to do with the future of food?
That is a big question.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're answering that exact question by looking at a text that genuinely, altered the landscape of modern cooking.
Yeah, we are examining the massive, highly acclaimed cookbook, Veganomicon, the ultimate vegan cookbook written by Chandra Moskowitz and Terry Hope Romero.
And our objective here, just to be clear, isn't to simply read off a list of ingredients.
No, definitely not.
We're not doing recipe instructions. The goal is to decode the underlying philosophy of modern plant-based cooking.
Which is fascinating. We're going to unpack how to build a flavor-packed, bulletproof pantry from the ground up.
Exactly. And we're going to explore the incredibly bold central argument the authors make right from the start, which is simply, vegan food is just normal food.
Right, which represents a profound shift in culinary psychology.
Oh, so.
Well, historically, the mainstream perception of vegan cooking was entirely about restriction. Like it was viewed purely through the lens of what a person was forbidden to eat.
Yeah, totally. Just salads and sad vegetables.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The shift here is moving away from that stubborn utilitarian substitution.
Yeah.
Just swapping a block of tofu for a piece of meat and moving toward a fundamental redefinition of what makes a meal complete.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the physical scale of this book is both hilarious and, honestly, deeply intimidating.
That's huge.
Reviewers have actually described it as a manifesto for world domination.
Yeah, the authors themselves jokingly refer to it as a doorstop of culinary knowledge. I mean, it is dense. It has over 250 recipes.
And the title itself sets a very specific, uncompromising tone. Veganomicon.
And there is our horror movie chainsaw.
Yes. The title is a massive, unapologetically nerdy play on the Necronomicon.
Which, for anyone who isn't steeped in 1980s cult cinema, is the Book of the Dead from the Bruce Campbell Evil Dead movies.
Right, and the authors explicitly reference this in the introduction. In the film, you find this ancient book in the woods, you accidentally read it aloud, your dead girlfriend is suddenly flying around laughing at you.
As one does.
Naturally. And you end up with a chainsaw attached to your arm instead of a hand. The authors assure us Veganomicon won't do that to you.
Though they do warn against reading the cookbook backward at the stroke of midnight, just as a precaution.
Which I love.
What's fascinating here is the deliberate use of self-awareness to disarm the reader.
Yeah, they're actively dismantling that earnest, humorless stereotype of the ascetic health food vegan.
Precisely. They frame this massive, comprehensive guide as their 80s power ballad.
Right. They compare it directly to their previous highly successful cookbooks, Vegan Cupcakes Take Over the World, and Vegan with a Vengeance.
Which they call their punk rock older sisters.
Yes, fast, loud, rebellious. But Veganomicon is the power ballad.
Yeah.
It has that touch of post-punk angst. It doesn't pull any punches, but it's fundamentally a sweeping love song dedicated to the sheer joy of cooking.
And that joy is anchored to their core philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Vegan food equals normal food.
Yeah.
They build this argument on the premise that culinary identity is never static. It is always in a state of constant, chaotic flux.
I mean, tradition is basically an illusion.
Exactly. The concept of a rigid, unbroken tradition is largely an illusion created by our limited perception of time.
They illustrate this beautifully by pointing to Italian food. When we think of classic, traditional Italian cuisine today, the immediate association is the tomato.
Oh, absolutely. Marinara sauce, heavy tomato bases for pizza, slow-simmered ragus.
But the historical reality is that the tomato is native to the Americas. It wasn't even widely incorporated into Italian cuisine until the 18th century.
Yeah, as the authors put it, in the grand sweep of human history, the 1700s are just a pizza throwaway from the present day.
A pizza throwaway. That's so good.
It is. Before the Columbian Exchange brought the tomato across the Atlantic, Italian food was characterized by completely different flavor profiles.
Like what?
Well, relying much more on ingredients like olive oil, garlic, various local herbs, without a hint of red sauce anywhere.
I find that shift staggering when you really think about it, but I do want to push back on their underlying premise just a little bit here.
Okay, go for it.
Isn't there a structural difference between organic agricultural shifts that happen slowly over centuries, like trading ships, introducing a new nightshade to Europe, and a deliberate, conscious restriction like veganism?
That's a fair point.
Because in one scenario, you're simply adding a new ingredient you discovered. In the other, you're drawing a hard line and saying, I will categorically exclude these highly functional traditional ingredients like dairy and meat.
Well, the mechanism of innovation is definitely driven by different initial motives. One is geographical expansion, the other is an ethical or dietary parameter.
Right.
However, the resulting process of culinary evolution is identical. When you remove a foundational pillar of a cuisine, or when you lack one, you force the cook to innovate.
So it's essentially like open source software development.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, think about it. In the tech world, if you're building an open source platform, you are strictly prohibited from using proprietary closed source code owned by a massive corporation. You can't take the easy prepackaged shortcut.
I see where you're going with this.
In this culinary analogy, relying on animal fat, butter, heavy cream to flavor a dish is that proprietary shortcut. Because you're operating under the constraint of not using that code, you're forced to pull from a massive, diverse, global community of developers.
Yes.
You have to look at how different global cuisines build flavor from the ground up to engineer a system that works just as well.
That analogy holds up perfectly when you look at how the authors approach flavor architecture. You are crowdsourcing techniques from the entire globe because the shortcut of animal fat isn't available.
Exactly.
When the author suggests taking a traditional American baked potato and stuffing it with an Indian samosa filling, or using Southeast Asian lemongrass to brighten up a classic Italian risotto, they aren't destroying culinary tradition.
No, not at all.
They are participating in the exact same process of global synthesis that originally gave Italy the tomato.
And for you listening right now, this is incredibly liberating regardless of your dietary habits.
Absolutely.
Whether you follow a strict plant-based diet, consider yourself a flexitarian, or you're just staring blankly into your refrigerator on a Tuesday evening suffering from severe cooking fatigue.
We've all been there.
We really have. Realizing that dinner doesn't have to be defined by a central piece of roasted meat flanked by 2 boiled vegetables changes everything.
It does. You aren't just cobbling together a meatless meal as a penalty. You are actively engaging in the creation of a new tradition.
But for this open source, globally influenced approach to actually work in daily life, it cannot exist purely in theory.
No, it has to survive the brutal reality of the environments where people actually cook.
Which brings us to the second visual from the beginning. The notoriously tiny New York City apartment.
Yes. The authors are very clear that these recipes were not conceptualized in some sprawling, pristine, stainless steel test kitchen with infinite counter space and perfect ventilation.
Not even close. They were developed in gritty, highly constrained urban apartment kitchens in Queens and Brooklyn.
They paint this vivid picture of waging daily wars with temperamental gas burners that only have 2 settings off, or inferno.
I used to have a stove exactly like that.
It's the worst, right? And moody ovens that heat unevenly. Tiny cabinets bursting with mismatched pots.
They talk about testing these recipes while gossiping with friends, leaning against the doorframe, constantly shooing nosy pets away from whatever minimal prep space they managed to clear.
Their guiding principle through all of this chaos was just to create recipes you wish you grew up with.
Acknowledging the physical constraints of the home cook is where the structural brilliance of the book shines.
It really is. They implemented a visual system of icons to guide the reader before they even look at an ingredient list.
It's a total lifesaver. A quick flick of the eye and you immediately know what you're committing to.
Yeah, they have clear icons for soy-free and gluten-free.
They have a low or reduced fat icon, which strictly denotes recipes utilizing less than 2 tablespoons of oil in their entirety.
They also have an under 45 minutes icon.
Though they wryly note that this time estimate does not factor in the time you spend yapping on the phone while chopping.
Which is very fair. But the most crucial icon in the entire book is supermarket friendly.
Yes. The supermarket-friendly designation is the ultimate test of their normal food thesis.
It signifies that a recipe does not require a pilgrimage to some upscale boutique health food store.
And the methodology behind how they define supermarket friendly is highly rigorous. They didn't just walk to the well-stocked, diverse grocery store down the street in Brooklyn and declare victory.
No, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the survival of any culinary movement depends heavily on its geographical accessibility.
Right.
If a cuisine can only be executed by people living in major metropolitan hubs with access to specialty importers, it remains an elite, marginalized curiosity.
So what did they do?
To counter this, the authors specifically tested their ingredient lists against the inventory of a standard, run-of-the-mill supermarket in rural Vermont, located near Isa's in-laws.
The rural Vermont test is brilliant. If you can't find the ingredient in a snowy, rural New England grocery aisle, it doesn't get the icon.
By enforcing this parameter, they are aggressively democratizing plant-based cooking. They note that standard blocks of tofu and cartons of soy milk successfully pass the Vermont test and earn the icon, but specialized thickeners like agar powder absolutely do not.
It totally shatters the persistent cultural myth that veganism requires a pristine, highly expensive, inaccessible lifestyle.
Completely.
It grounds the entire philosophy in the dirt and sweat of everyday reality. There's this wonderful illustrative image they provide of their sourcing process.
Now at the subway hall.
Yes, they describe the physical toll of lugging massive canvas bags onto the subway, packed with creamy yellow ears of corn, heavy butternut squash, giant stalks of Brussels sprouts.
And just imagine the sheer logistics of dragging a 3-foot stalk of Brussels sprouts onto a packed F train during rush hour.
It's hilarious, and it completely demystifies the process of cooking. You acquire the best ingredients you have access to, you haul them back to whatever compromised space you inhabit, and you apply technique to make it work.
So we've essentially engineered a kitchen philosophy that relies on accessibility and global synthesis.
Right.
The theory is useless if we don't know what we're actually cooking with. If we're throwing out the traditional crutches of meat and dairy, what exactly happens when you open the doors of those tiny apartment cabinets?
What is the actual physical makeup of this modernized pantry?
Well, the book methodically breaks down the foundational architecture of the pantry, starting with the most resilient, unglamorous item, the can.
The humble tin can.
Exactly. They make a compelling argument that an entire complex dinner can be reverse-engineered from a single can of beans. Chickpeas, black beans, kidney, navy, pintos.
They view the can of beans not as a side dish, but as the ultimate starting point for a meal's protein and structural foundation.
Right. Moving beyond legumes, they highlight coconut milk. The authors are emphatic that for creating luxurious bisques and deeply satisfying curries, nothing in the plant kingdom matches the sheer, dense creaminess of full-fat coconut milk.
Then we have canned tomatoes, crushed, whole, or the highly concentrated tomato paste that comes in those little metal tubes.
They maintain their approachable tone here, admitting they usually just grab the absolute cheapest brand of crushed tomatoes available, unless they're cooking to impress company.
Right. Then they say they buy the fire-roasted ones and deplete their hedge funds.
Which is a great line because they instantly followed up by asking the reader, P.S., what's a hedge fund?
It's a perfect example of their refusal to take themselves too seriously, even while giving precise culinary instruction.
But the real structural transformation happens when we transition from the dry pantry to the refrigerator staples. This is where the specific mechanisms for replacing the functions of animal products are revealed.
Let's open that fridge. The first thing sitting on the shelf might surprise a lot of people. Applesauce, not packaged in little cups for a lunchbox, but kept as a critical functional ingredient for low-fat vegan baking.
Yeah, when you're removing eggs and butter, you're removing fat and moisture. Applesauce acts as a structural substitute, providing that necessary moisture to cakes and muffins without weighing the crumb down.
Next to the applesauce is the miso.
They specifically recommend keeping white or sweet miso, alongside a darker, more robust brown rice miso.
Now, this is one of those ingredients where the how is so much more important than the what.
Definitely.
We all know miso as the cloudy soup at a sushi restaurant, but how does fermented Japanese paste replace the function of a beef roast?
It comes down to the enzymatic breakdown during fermentation. In traditional Western cooking, if you want to build a deep, savory, resonant background for a stew or a gravy, you naturally reach for a long-simmered beef or chicken bone broth.
Right.
The marrow and the slow breakdown of animal proteins release glutamates, which coat the tongue and provide that sensation of umami, the fifth taste.
Okay, so how does miso do that?
Well, miso is made by fermenting soybeans with a mold called koji. That fermentation process breaks down the plant proteins into free amino acids, heavily concentrating those exact same glutamates.
Wow.
So when you add a spoonful of brown rice miso to a vegetable stew, you are introducing the same molecular depth and full-bodied backdrop as bone broth, entirely from a plant source.
That is incredible. You're essentially hacking the human tongue's umami receptors.
You really are.
Right next to the miso, we have the heavy hitters of plant protein, tempeh and tofu.
Now, they describe tempeh as a fermented soybean patty, and they are fully self-aware that saying fermented soybean patty out loud is not going to make anyone's mouth water.
Definitely not.
But they swear that when it is steamed to remove the bitterness and then marinated, it becomes an incredibly succulent addition to any dish. They even throw in the ultimate endorsement. Ice's mom swears by it.
You can't argue with mom. And with tofu, the focus isn't on what it is, but how you manipulate its physical structure.
Yes. They note that critics often mispronounce it intentionally to sound disdainful. But the knowledgeable cook understands that tofu is a sponge.
Right, if you freeze it, the water inside expands into ice crystals, tearing the cellular walls.
And then when you thaw and press it, you're left with a porous, highly textured matrix that absorbs marinades and mimics the chew of meat flawlessly.
Then we have Veganomicon. They are fierce, unapologetic loyalists to this specific brand of vegan mayonnaise.
They insist it is the absolute ultimate. Don't waste your time with anything else. It provides the necessary fat and tang for potato salads, heavy dressings, and sandwiches.
But the most intriguing resident of the fridge section brings us right back to our opening visualization. The tiny glass jar.
The capers.
The capers. They elevate the sharp, briny taste of caper berries to the status of a secret ingredient.
They aren't just sprinkling them on top of a Mediterranean pasta dish for visual appeal.
No, they are actively blending them up, breaking them down into dips, aiolis, and dressings to inject a piercing, salty bite that cuts through rich flavors.
The way they utilize these fridge staples really stretches the boundaries of that open source concept we discussed earlier.
Actually, it triggers a completely different analogy for me. When I look at that specific combination of ingredients, mashed apples, fermented soybean paste, pureed capers, it doesn't look like a traditional kitchen prep station.
What does it look like?
It looks like the special effects department on a movie set.
How so?
Well, think about practical effects in filmmaking. If a director wants to create the illusion of a massive, pouring rainstorm on camera, they don't sit around waiting for the meteorology to cooperate.
Right, they make it happen.
Exactly. They bring in a complex system of overhead sprinklers, massive fans, very specific backlighting to create a practical effect. They engineer an illusion so convincing that the audience sitting in the theater completely buys into the reality of the storm.
Oh, I see.
In the vegan kitchen, you're doing the exact same thing with flavor. You are using unexpected tools, apples for moisture, koji fermentation for depth, capers for brine to recreate the practical effects of traditional comfort foods.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it. You are manipulating the sensory experience.
You're engineering the exact same physical and chemical reactions on the palate so successfully that the audience, the person eating the meal, never feels like the original components are missing.
And a massive secondary benefit of this reliance on special effects ingredients is how it rapidly accelerates a cook's versatility.
Yeah, how does that work?
Well, if your baseline for making a sandwich spread involves understanding how to balance the brininess of pureed capers with the fat of a vegan aioli, you are actively expanding your culinary vocabulary far beyond the standard American repertoire of just squirting mustard from a plastic bottle.
That makes total sense. You're learning the mechanics of flavor.
You aren't just surviving the restrictions of a vegan diet. You are developing into a highly sophisticated, technically proficient cook.
So we have the structural base covered. We know how to introduce moisture, texture, deep umami. But nailing the physical texture is only the baseline requirement.
A meal can have perfect texture and still taste like wet cardboard.
Exactly. The true soul of this cuisine, the element that makes the food actively craveable, lives entirely in the spice rack.
The authors do not mince words here. They explicitly crown the spice rack as the heart of the vegan kitchen.
They give us a very strict mathematical baseline right out of the gate regarding herbs. 1 teaspoon of a dried herb is the equivalent of 1 tablespoon of a finely chopped fresh herb.
Which is a vital metric to internalize, because the dehydration process dramatically concentrates the essential oils in the herbs.
But beyond ratios, they issue a very passionate, almost desperate plea to the reader regarding the actual lifespan of those spices.
Yes.
And I am asking you, the listener, to do a mental audit of your own kitchen cabinets right
Right.
now. Be honest. How old is that generic tin of ground black pepper sitting in the dark corner of your pantry?
Too old, probably.
The authors are practically begging you to throw out the 5-year-old battered can of pepper. They describe the flavor of old pepper as dusty and warn that using expired spices will literally make your entire dish taste old and fatigued.
We really need to pause and emphasize why this matters so much more in plant-based cooking than in traditional cooking.
Okay, why is that?
It goes back to the fundamental mechanics of flavor extraction. As we discussed with the bone broth, animal meat intrinsically contains high levels of fats, amino acids, and glutamates.
Right.
When you apply heat to a piece of meat, triggering the Maillard reaction, those compounds break down and interact to provide a very heavy, deeply satisfying flavor profile with almost zero intellectual effort from the cook.
You apply fire, and the meat naturally tastes good, so the meat is essentially a flavor crutch doing all the heavy lifting.
Precisely. The meat is doing the work.
Yeah.
But when you remove those intrinsic animal fats, you're removing the crutch. Spices and cooking oils are no longer just optional garnishes to sprinkle on at the end.
They become the primary load-bearing architects of the dish's flavor.
Yes. If your primary architectural material is a highly oxidized 5-year-old can of dusty pepper, where all the volatile organic compounds evaporated in 2019, the entire flavor structure of your meal will collapse.
That makes the stakes of a well-maintained spice rack so much clearer. And the exact same architectural principle applies to the fats you use to extract those flavors.
The authors break down their oil roster by precise function, which is a level of technical detail I think a lot of casual home cooks completely gloss over.
Oh, for sure. Most people just grab whatever bottle of slippery liquid is closest to the stove.
Treating all oils as interchangeable is a critical error. The chemical properties of the oil dictate the success of the cooking technique.
Let's look how they categorize them. They start with canola oil. They offer a quick history lesson, noting it was originally called rapeseed oil, but was smartly rebranded to Canada oil, or canola, for marketing purposes.
It is their workhorse, high heat tolerance, perfectly neutral flavor, and a solid source of omega-3 fatty acids.
Then they move to coconut oil. They specify unrefined coconut oil to capture that luscious tropical aroma that is absolutely mandatory for building authentic Southeast Asian curries.
They also take a moment to actively defend coconut oil. For a long time, it was heavily typecast as a nutritional villain due to its saturated fat content, but they clarify that non-hydrogenated coconut oil is perfectly safe and highly functional when used appropriately.
Good to know. Then we have olive oil. Extra virgin is their standard for dressings and light sautés, but they draw a hard line, specifically instructing the reader to use regular virgin olive oil for shallow, low to medium heat frying.
They warn against ever taking extra virgin olive oil to high heat.
Next is grapeseed oil, utilized purely for its clean, neutral taste in delicate salad dressings where you don't want the oil competing with the herbs.
Peanut oil is highlighted for its incredibly high smoke point, making it non-negotiable for aggressive Asian stir-fries and deep frying.
And finally, we arrive at toasted sesame oil.
The distinction they draw with toasted sesame oil is perhaps the most important technical tip in this section.
What's the rule?
You absolutely do not use it as a cooking medium. It is strictly a finishing oil.
A finishing oil. So if you dump a 1/4 cup of toasted sesame oil into a hot wok and try to stir-fry vegetables in it, you are going to trigger a chemical disaster.
Because the triglycerides in the oil will rapidly break down at that heat, releasing glycerol and free fatty acids, which instantly burn and turn toxic.
Exactly. You end up with a pan full of acrid, bitter smoke and ruined vegetables.
Understand the high smoke point of peanut oil, required to achieve the Maillard reaction on a piece of tofu, versus the delicate, volatile nature of a finishing oil like toasted sesame, is literally the dividing line between a sad, soggy, bitter pile of vegetables and a vibrant restaurant-quality meal.
The authors are also highly sympathetic to the intimidation factor of building this architectural toolkit. Accumulating a diverse array of fresh spices and specific oils can seem prohibitively expensive if you're relying on the baking aisle of a standard corporate supermarket.
Anyone who cooks knows that painful feeling. You find an incredible recipe, you see it calls for cardamom pods or saffron, you go to the store, and a tiny glass jar the size of your thumb costs $8.
The author's advice is incredibly blunt here. Stop doing that.
They urge the reader to break out of the supermarket bubble and find sources for bulk herbs and spices.
They direct you to seek out local Indian, Middle Eastern, or Chinese grocers. They estimate that buying spices in bulk bags can save you upwards of 75% of the cost.
And this isn't just about saving money. It completely alters your culinary psychology.
How so?
When cumin costs you pennies per ounce instead of dollars, you aren't afraid to use a heavy hand to build a robust flavor base. You experiment more freely because the financial risk of failure is drastically lowered.
And sprinkled among these high-level architectural tips are moments of pure, unfiltered kitchen folklore.
Yes.
Which brings me to my absolute favorite tip in the entire book. I have to share this because it made me laugh out loud. And it is printed right there in the source text.
Oh, the onion thing.
Yes. Isa explicitly swears that if you breathe strictly and exclusively through your mouth while chopping onions, you will never cry.
She is so confident in this absurd physiological hack that she literally challenges the reader to try it and determine if she is, quote, lying and crazy or not.
The science on that is highly debatable, as the sulfuric compounds in the onion seek moisture in the eyes regardless of your breathing patterns.
But it's a remarkably bold claim.
I don't care about the science on this one. I care about the challenge. I am officially challenging you, the listener, to employ the mouth-breathing technique the next time you dice an onion. Report back to the universe with your findings.
So we have established a highly technical foundation for savory cooking. We understand umami, we understand lipid extraction, and we understand heat manipulation.
Right. Mastering savory cooking is, for many, an intuitive process of tasting and adjusting. You add a little salt, you splash some acid, you balance the heat.
But when we transition into the dessert section of the book, that intuition goes out the window. Baking without the structural pillars of eggs and dairy requires a hard pivot into advanced chemistry.
Oh, absolutely. The old adage is entirely true. Cooking is an art, but baking is a rigid science.
And vegan baking is essentially advanced placement organic chemistry. We have to dive into the alchemy they use to make this work. We're dealing with thickeners, binders, and leaveners. Let's start with the ingredient that sounds like it belongs in a marine biology lab, agar.
Agar, specifically in powder or flake form. This is their definitive high-performance plant alternative to animal gelatin.
Which naturally raises a deeply uncomfortable question about what traditional gelatin actually is. Something most consumers actively avoid thinking about when eating a bright red strawberry dessert.
Yeah, traditional gelatin is a protein derived from boiling down the skin, cartilage, and bones of animals, typically pigs and cows, to extract a collagen.
Which is objectively horrifying when you consider its primary application is jiggly fruit salads and marshmallows.
Agar, conversely, is a hydrocolloid extracted directly from red algae or seaweed.
Beyond the obvious ethical and sourcing differences, the authors highlight a unique, highly functional chemical property of agar. It sets and firms up entirely at room temperature.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Traditional collagen-based gelatin requires prolonged refrigeration to stabilize its protein matrix. Agar sets up beautifully right on the kitchen counter.
That isn't just a substitution. That is a functional, logistical upgrade for the cook.
It really is. Moving past the hydrocolloids, we hit vital wheat gluten.
This is the isolated protein naturally occurring in wheat flour. In traditional baking, it's what gives bread dough its elasticity and stretch.
But when you isolate it and hydrate it with savory broths, it transforms into an incredibly dense, chewy protein matrix known as seitan, or wheat meat. It possesses a genuinely toothsome, fibrous bite that mimics muscle tissue.
When it comes to the chemistry of thickening sauces or fruit pies, the authors draw a very strict, scientifically accurate line between arrowroot powder and tapioca flour.
You cannot simply swap them out blindly based on whatever's in the pantry. They serve distinct chemical functions.
Right. Arrowroot powder is utilized when you need a perfectly clear, non-opaque finish like a glossy stir-fry sauce.
Tapioca flour, however, is their absolute starch of choice for thickening the filling of fruit pies, as it withstands the prolonged baking times and acidic fruit juices without breaking down.
And then we reach the actual engines of the baking process. The elements that provide lift, they affectionately dub them the Wonder Twins. Baking powder and baking soda.
The elegance of the chemical reaction here is what makes vegan baking possible without the mechanical lift of whipped egg whites.
How so?
Well, baking soda is pure sodium bicarbonate, an alkali base. When it makes contact with moisture, it does nothing. But when it meets an acidic moisture, it rapidly reacts and releases carbon dioxide gas, creating bubbles.
And baking powder?
Baking powder is a premixed compound. It contains both the alkaline baking soda and a dry acid salt, typically cream of tartar. When you use a double-acting baking powder and introduce it to an acidic liquid like apple cider vinegar or lemon juice, you get a compounded reaction.
Oh.
Yeah, you get the first release of carbon dioxide when the wet ingredients hit the dry, and a second, more powerful release when the thermal energy of the oven hits the batter, forcing the cake to rise aggressively.
It is a literal multi-stage science experiment happening inside your mixing bowl.
Exactly.
But of course, a cake isn't just about lift. We have to sweeten the deal. Let's look at their sugar alternatives.
They utilize agave nectar, a liquid sweetener derived from the exact same desert cactus used to distill tequila.
They lean heavily on maple syrup, which Isa hilariously categorizes as the taste of freedom, entirely because she spends too much time visiting family in Vermont.
Crucially, they specify the use of grade B maple syrup. Grade B is harvested later in the season. It is darker, significantly more robust in flavor, and ironically, usually cheaper than the delicate grade A.
But buried in the section on basic sweeteners is a very serious, eye-opening warning about standard white sugar.
This raises an important question regarding supply chain transparency. They issue a stark warning about generic cane sugar.
They inform the reader that standard refined white cane sugar in the United States is frequently processed and filtered through animal bone char in order to strip away its natural color and achieve that blinding, pristine white appearance.
Which perfectly encapsulates the hyper-awareness that this level of baking demands.
You aren't just reading the bold print on the front of the package. You are required to understand the entire agricultural supply chain and the obscured industrial processing methods of your most basic pantry staples.
But looking at all of this complex chemistry, the silose hydrocolloids, the isolated wheat proteins, the precise acid-base reactions I have to play devil's advocate.
Go for it.
If baking is this rigid of a science, doesn't replacing the rich, natural fat of dairy butter and the physical binding power of eggs with mashed apples and chemical wonder twins run the risk of producing food that tastes artificial?
Doesn't it just taste purely utilitarian?
You're describing the exact historical critique of vegan baked goods. It is the enduring stereotype of the penitential scone.
Yes, the penitential scone. The dense, dry, crumbly hockey puck of a pastry that you force yourself to eat purely to prove a moral or dietary point while secretly wishing you were eating a real croissant.
But the authors completely shatter that stereotype, and they bring receipts to prove it. The source text actually incorporates a quote from a notoriously hard-to-please New York Times food reviewer who evaluated their earlier baking book.
What did the review say?
The reviewer specifically praised Moskowitz and Romero for officially moving the needle past those lumpy penitential scones and muffins. The review noted that instead, they produce, and I'm quoting directly here, insanely fetching cupcakes with mousse fillings, buttercream frostings, chocolate ganache icings, and sprinkles galore.
Insanely fetching cupcakes. That is the standard we are aiming for.
And the reason it works so effectively is because the science is sound. The chemistry is rooted in the core, universal mechanics of baking acid plus base equals lift. Moisture plus fat equals a tender crumb.
They aren't just blindly substituting weird ingredients and hoping for the best. They possess a fundamental structural understanding of how to build a cake from the molecular level up.
Okay, let's take a step back and look at what we've assembled.
We understand the punk rock open source philosophy.
We have embraced the gritty, constrained reality of the urban kitchen.
We have stocked a super-powered, globally sourced pantry.
We understand the lipid chemistry of the spice rack and the acid-base alchemy of the baking bowl.
So how does all of this theory actually translate to the dinner table? Let's take a deep dive into the actual menus.
The book is categorized with incredible thoroughness, housing over 250 distinct recipes. You have sections for snacks, brunch, sandwiches spelled playfully with 2 M's casseroles, 1-pot meals, and of course, desserts.
Just reading a recipe titles out loud is enough to trigger a Pavlovian response. Samosa stuffed baked potatoes.
Chili cornmeal-crusted tofu po' boy.
A deeply comforting pasta dish, simply titled the Mac Daddies.
And jelly donut cupcakes.
But before the reader is even allowed to tackle those complex multi-stage recipes, they encounter a section that I genuinely believe is the secret pedagogical weapon of the entire book.
You are referring to the mix and mash section.
Yes, the mix and match section. It isn't a list of flashy meals. It is a strictly foundational curriculum.
It is entirely dedicated to teaching the raw mechanics of cooking. It breaks down, step by step, exactly how to properly roast a root vegetable so it caramelizes instead of steaming.
How to toast and simmer a bizarre grain like millet. How to properly soak and cook dried beans so they are creamy, not chalky.
So what does this all mean for the listener? The pedagogical brilliance of this specific structural choice cannot be overstated.
How so?
By teaching the reader how to extract flavor from a squash or how to manage the hydration of a lagoon before ever throwing a complex casserole recipe at them, the book is doing something wonderfully subversive. It is actively training the reader to become an independent thinking cook.
It is the culinary equivalent of Teach a Man to Fish, but applied to obscure legumes and squashes.
Exactly that. The ultimate highest goal of any truly great cookbook should not be to foster dependency. It shouldn't train you to blindly follow instructions line by line forever.
The goal should be to eventually make the book itself obsolete.
By equipping you with these granular foundational skills, the authors are giving you the tools to open your own refrigerator, survey your newly minted global pantry, and engineer your own completely original recipes.
And when you do decide you want to follow their lead and cook a curated meal, the themed menus they provide at the back of the book are wonderfully eclectic and prove their initial thesis.
They offer a menu titled The Vegan Ghost of Julia Child, which attacks classic French techniques without the butter.
They have a smash your TV dinner menu designed to recreate nostalgic frozen comfort foods from scratch, and a Mardi Gras anytime menu bursting with Cajun spice profiles.
Let's look closely at that samosa stuffed baked potato for a second because it perfectly encapsulates the culinary whippersnapper attitude they promised us in the introduction.
It is a brilliant synthesis of two completely disparate comfort foods.
You take the quintessential utilitarian American side dish, the giant foil-wrapped russet baked potato. You bake it until the skin is impossibly crispy and the starch inside is fluffy.
Then, instead of grounding it in the proprietary shortcut of sour cream and bacon bits, you hollow it out. You build an incredibly fragrant, complex Indian samosa filling using the exact architectural tools we discussed earlier.
You blow mustard seeds and cumin in high-heat peanut oil. You fold in potatoes, green peas, and fresh cilantro.
It is stuff that intensely spiced, globally sourced mixture back into the crispy American potato skin. It is familiar, yet entirely new.
It perfectly reflects the chaotic, beautiful diversity of New York City, the exact environment where these recipes were born. It represents a full-throated embrace of global flavor profiles, operating entirely without rigid historical borders.
And it serves the ultimate master, the cook's reality. Whether you are exhausted and just trying to prep a quick, nutritious meal on a busy Tuesday night, or you are pulling out all the stops to impress the mayor of your town, which is a highly specific, high-pressure scenario the authors actually mention in the text.
The structure of these recipes fundamentally respects the cook's time, their financial budget, and their intellectual creativity.
By tying all these elements together, the low barrier to entry, the supermarket-friendly ingredients, the foundational pedagogy of the authors effectively remove the lingering aura of elitism from ethical eating.
They absolutely do.
So to wrap up this incredibly deep dive, we started this journey by picturing a blood-spattered chainsaw, a frustratingly tiny apartment, and a jar of capers.
And we have ended up dissecting a master guide to completely redefining what the phrase normal food actually means.
We explored how a cookbook born in cramped, sweaty Queens and Brooklyn kitchens evolved into an acclaimed culinary powerhouse.
And it achieved that status simply because it flatly refused to compromise on bold flavor, it refused to lose its irreverent sense of humor, and above all else, it prioritized everyday accessibility.
And looking at the sheer scale of what they accomplished leaves us with a genuinely provocative historical thought.
We spent time discussing how the introduction of the tomato revolutionized and completely redefined traditional Italian food a mere 300 years ago.
Right.
And right now, in this exact cultural moment, modern vegan cuisine is actively engaged in synthesizing wildly disparate global ingredients. Cooks are seamlessly blending Japanese koji fermentation, isolated vital wheat gluten, and the sap of Mexican desert cactuses into everyday meals.
Okay, I see where you're going.
So, the ultimate question is, what entirely new, currently unnamed global cuisine is being born right now in these cramped, chaotic, urban kitchens? Well, think about the timeline of food evolution. In 100 years, when our great-grandchildren sit down for dinner, will they view a dish like a samosa stuffed baked potato or a perfectly executed Satan piccata, not as a quirky, restrictive vegan alternative, but simply as classic, universally traditional Earth cuisine?
Are we right now watching the painful, messy, delicious birth of an entirely new tradition in real time?
Classic Earth cuisine. That is an incredibly massive paradigm-shifting thought to chew on.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope you are walking away feeling inspired, armed with a little more chemistry, and ready to look at your pantry with fresh eyes.
Go check the expiration date on your black pepper. Seriously audit that spice rack. And please try breathing exclusively through your mouth the next time you chop an onion.
We'll see you next time.